language shift and what happens when language shift happens. The process of language shift, also known as language transfer or language replacement or language assimilation, is when a community of speakers of a language shifts to speaking a completely different language, usually over an extended period of time. From a historical perspective, this happened, for example, when in the now France, they shifted from Gaulish to Latin during the Roman Empire. The reasons for this were that Latin was perceived as to be higher status and it spread at the expense of the other language, Gaulish, that was perceived by its speakers as to be lower status. Now, in the past 150-ish years, a little bit more, many countries developed a standard language, shifting from regional languages to a language that was considered more prestigious and therefore more valuable. In Italy, for example, since the times of the Renaissance, a trans-Italian language was developed in central Italy, based on the Florentine Tuscan, because of its cultural prestige. This Florentine Tuscan, think about the Tre Corone, Dante, Petrarca, Boccaccio, started to be employed for formal, literary, and written purposes among the literate classes from the various states of mainland Italy, Sicily, and Corsica, sidelining the other dialects in education and formal setting. Now, literary speaking, Florentine established itself as the single most representative dialect of Italy, long before its political unification in 1861. Thus, Tuscan has been officially adopted by the pre-Unitarian states, and Italian further expanded as a commonly spoken linguistic form for everyday use throughout the country after World War II. Nowadays, we can observe a validation of the local dialects and regional variants again, but that is a topic for another video. What is interesting to see is that the historical language shift can be observed also on a sociolinguistic level in multilingual people. So those who speak multiple languages usually have 1, 2, 3 or more languages that are more dominant for a certain period of time. Now, there are multiple factors that determine what language is more dominant in a given period. Depending on the situation, the phase of your life, the personal preferences and the actual needs of using the language or languages on a regular basis influence the individual status of the language or languages. So, for example, though I was fluent in German almost all of my life, I spent 6 years using it only sporadically and preferring Italian and French because I needed them daily for work and research. German became less important, less valued in the community that I was living in, and also among my friends, which led to a language shift and almost language loss. In fact, I had to invest considerable energy and time in reactivating my German, which I perceived then as dormant. So it was present in terms of I knew and understood the language, but didn't use it frequently enough to be able to have longer fluent communication and conversations in it anymore. So the same happened to my English as well, that I used only sporadically during the same period of time, and that I only reactivated, used on a daily basis or very consistently 14 years ago. So it's in the past 14 years that I increased the use of my English, and it is the language that I use now on a daily basis. Language shifts happen to multilingual speakers who usually live, study, work in settings where 1 or 2 or 3 of their languages are required more than the others. So although all the languages that we acquire and learn at some point in life are still in our language memory, Those we use more often are more in the foreground and ready to be used, whereas those we use only sporadically or only in reading, for example, are less present and ready to be actively used. Think of it like a muscle. If we train the muscle for a certain amount of time, it's still there, even if we don't use it. So it's not that we would completely use the knowledge or the skills that we had in a language that we were using more frequently before. We just have to retrain that muscle, reuse that language more frequently in order to make it work. What does this mean with language shift in children? Now, when our multilingual children start attending daycare or school in another language, their language preference will shift towards the language of their education. They will need to become as fluent as possible in the school language in order to succeed academically. Many parents are advised then to focus more on the school language, which is understandable in order to support their children, and some are even told to drop their home language, which is completely unnecessary and actually counterproductive. In fact, skills that our children acquired and learned in their home languages or home language can be transferred to the school language or school languages and vice versa. It is a fact, though, that the home languages, as a consequence of more exposure in the school or community language, will become less important. If children don't receive adequate and consistent input in their home languages that foster understanding, speaking, and maybe also reading and writing, the language shift from home language to school language can go so far for children to not to respond in the home languages anymore. And in order not to have a complete language shift that could lead to language loss, that we want to avoid, we should take it seriously. And we as parents should involve also the educators, the community, whoever is in our multilingual village, ideally as many as possible, in order to support and foster the home languages. Have you ever experienced language shift? I would like to hear from you. And maybe you have experiences, maybe a friend of yours, a family member, maybe your child. Please leave a comment here below. And if you like this video, please click subscribe, click the bell to be notified every time I publish a new video.